Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that'll determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views that are expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views. And, well, for this next hour, they're going to be the views, again, of Ted Gunderson. Okay, Ted, are you still there?
Oh, I'm still here, Dr. Stan.
Well, you go ahead and pick the story up.
Well, I might go back to Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil. I did a lot of the research on the West Coast for Maury. And, for example, Berkowitz, this is the son of Sam now, had told Maury in an interview that there was a satanic sign that was left at the scene of the Roy Radin murder. By the way, a fellow named Bill Mincer and 3 other cohorts were tried and convicted for Roy Radin's murder.
Now, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about that? Was he somebody who was some sort of affiliated with Hollywood? It was killed there on the West Coast?
Yeah, Roy Radin was in a contract dispute with a leading Hollywood producer, and the story goes, and I don't want to name that producer because he was considered but not involved in the murders. And for some reason or other, there was a contract put out on Roy Radin, and it was on a Friday the 13th of that, forget exactly what year it was. And Roy Radin came out here for a meeting from New York. He was from Long Island, New York. And he met with Bill Mincer and 3 other individuals, and they took him for a ride about 65 miles north of Los Angeles and up into the hills. And he made a run for it, and they shot him with a shotgun. And then they put a stick of dynamite in his mouth and set it off. It was way out in the country. And he was found like 30 days later, his body was, and they traced him back to Long Island, New York. And Bill Mincer was he's in jail now, by the way. He was a well-known satanic contract killer. He was known as Charles Manson II. This is in Maury's book, The Ultimate Evil. And Mincer, as a matter of fact, in the spring of 1986, came into my living room, waited for me, and that was another occasion when I didn't go home. But that's another story. I guess I should not go home every night, and just every once in a while go home. So, but anyway, Mincer was ended up being tried and convicted for the Roy Radin murder, and sentenced to life in prison without parole, as I understand it. But it was kind of interesting because Berkowitz told Maury Terry that they left a sign, and in your cult murder, they always leave a sign. They're very arrogant, and so we looked at the crime scene. We were out there, I guess, about a year afterwards, and we looked at the crime scene, and we found under a scrub bush, under a scrub pine, a Bible that was opened to Isaiah chapter 22, 22:13, I think it was. And that the subliminal message there was drink of the blood, eat of the meat, and so on and so forth. That's in Isaiah. So this was one of the signatures that they left for the Roy Radin murder. They always leave a signature. And unless a professional investigator, professional means from the standpoint of realizing what the cult does and their telltale signs, is looking for it, you don't usually see it. You don't understand that it's there. But this is all written up in Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil.
I remember that part of the story, and I always wondered who it was who'd actually found the Bible there.
Well, Maury and I both found the Bible there.
Okay.
We were at the scene, went up to the scene, looked it over, because Berkowitz had told Maury.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Go right ahead.
You want me to keep going?
Go right ahead.
Oh, so anyway, so Maury made, hang on a minute, a number of trips to the West Coast, and I helped him with the investigation. Also, one of my associates, Judy Hansen, also worked with Maury Terry, and it was a fantastic book. It's I think it sold very well, and what I did, I bought, I don't know how many copies of it, maybe 50 copies of it, and I went to Washington, and I had appointments with congressmen and senators, and I went in and talked to them about it. In fact, Biden was one of the individuals I talked to. He met with me personally. I spent about 45 minutes with him. I left him a copy of the book, and of course, nothing ever came of it. I was kind of curious to find out that Biden wanted to interview me personally rather than have one of his administrative aides. Most of the congressmen, senators had one of their aides interview me and talk to me. But I passed this book out. I've made about, I guess, in my career after the FBI, I made probably 6 or 8 different trips to Washington D.C. Trying to wake up our congressmen, senators. But they're, I don't know if they're sleeping or if they're part of the cover-up. But anyway, nothing seems to work, including I have advanced information about the 9/11 terrorist attack. That's another story, and I went back to Washington and gave it to Congress, over 150 congressmen, senators. Nothing ever came of that. But anyway, going back to the ultimate evil. So anyway, I worked closely with Maury. Maury and I are very good friends, and I don't think Maury did any follow-up work on I don't know what he's doing now. He helped produce a couple of shows, and in fact, I was on a TV show with him in San Francisco where we discussed the ultimate evil. But that's just one of the things. Another thing we mentioned earlier about Ken Lanning. Ken Lanning is an apologist for the cults, or actually he's involved in it. I'm not sure which. But he's gone around the country claiming, of course, police departments look up to the FBI as the experts. And in my career, I've learned that a number of police departments don't know what's going on. Most of them don't know what's going on when it comes to satanic cults. So they go to the FBI for advice and seeking the research and what have you. And what's the FBI do? They refer these police departments to a fellow named Ken Lanning. Now, he's no longer with the FBI. He retired, by the way. And so Ken Lanning comes out and he says to the police departments, this is his basic line.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here to bring our stations on board. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Ted Gunderson is simply talking about how this Ken Lanning, who worked for the FBI for many years, now retired, but how Ken Lanning said whenever there was a concern about satanic crimes in a local area, why, of course, it would go to the FBI, and Ken Lanning would come forward and say there are no satanic crimes, there are no satanic cults in America. And it's sort of like J. Edgar Hoover for so many years said there is no mafia. They knew there was a mafia, but they didn't want the American people to know. Why? Because the mafia, of course, would be used to carry out assassinations for the CIA and for other branches of our intelligence service and people in high levels of government. They concealed the existence of the mafia really up until the time of the late 1950s, or perhaps even the early 1960s when President Kennedy came into office. But now, of course, through the years, they've always insisted there were no satanic crimes. And of course, it was very obvious there were, but the FBI then was actively covering for them. Did that represent the J. Edgar Hoover's relationship to the Masons? He was a 33rd degree Mason. He himself was a transvestite, cross-dresser, and probably a homosexual. So was this the reason they were covering it up? I don't know. But go ahead, Ted.
Well, so Ken Lanning, basically his line is that there's no organized satanic cult, just a few dabblers around, writing on the walls and so on and so forth. And that was his approach. And, of course, it had tremendous influence over local police departments who are looking for information and searching for the truth. So he's been a real terrible. It's been a terrible experience for him to do this. By the way, speaking of organized crime, Dr. Stan, when I was in the FBI, I worked under Bobby Kennedy, in the organized crime section for 2.5 years. And that came to light after the Appalachia meeting of the Mafia in Appalachia, New York, in the late 1950s, as you recall.
Right.
A state trooper noticed all these out-of-state license plates, cars that were visiting there, and started taking down their numbers, and it was a big Mafia meeting.
Right.
And that really broke open and exposed the Mafia, the first real good exposure of the Mafia.
And of course, the thing is that may very well have been part of one reason why they wanted to get rid of Bobby Kennedy, because Bobby Kennedy then was pushing against the Mafia, and there were a lot of people within government, of course, were trying to conceal that evidence. And J. Edgar Hoover kept insisting there was no Mafia, no Cosa Nostra. And, of course, after this meeting, and Bobby Kennedy did everything he could to bring out that there really was a Mafia, and Hoover then was forced to go after them.
Well, I have a little inside story on that. What happened was, within the FBI, there was William C. Sullivan. Bill Sullivan was a personal friend of mine. He was the assistant director and an outstanding individual who was later murdered, by the way, in a hunting accident. It wasn't an accident. He was murdered in New Hampshire, hunting, supposedly hunting. He was shot by the son of a state trooper. Bill said he was domestic intelligence, which was in internal security and what have you. And Bill said that there was a Mafia all along. And then the fellow who was in charge of organized crime, I don't need to mention his name, but I worked directly for him, said there was no Mafia. So J. Edgar Hoover believed the fellow who was in charge of organized crime that there was no Mafia against William C. Sullivan. By the way, I might mention that Bill Sullivan, I was an agent in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We call them brick agents, meaning we pounded the bricks, the street agent. And I was in the field for about 10 years before I advanced to Washington, D.C. as a supervisor in organized crime. And Bill came out to talk to Los Alamos scientists for a lecture, and I drove him to Los Alamos. And on the way back, he took a liking to him. He said, "Ted, you need to advance." And Bill brought me back to Washington, D.C., and Bill ended up being liaison with the Warren Commission on the Jack Kennedy assassination. And he got in a feud with J. Edgar Hoover. And he came in one Monday morning, and his name had been scratched off the door, and the locks had been changed. Now, I never talked to Bill about this, but I suspect that he was a very honest man, very dedicated, and I really believe, deep down inside, that he was trying to expose the true facts of the Jack Kennedy assassination, and he and J. Edgar Hoover got into it over that.
Well, I think Hoover was intentionally trying to cover up the truth. I think they and the CIA and certainly people within the military and the Mafia, they were all involved in it, and that was the last thing they could do, was let the truth come out about the murder, the assassination of an American president.
Dr. Stan, I have personal first-hand knowledge. I've interviewed an individual who can say, and did tell me, that the night before the Kennedy assassination, Clint Murchison Sr., big oil man in Dallas, had a private meeting, and in attendance at that meeting were Lyndon Baines Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover.
And I think Richard Nixon was there,
too. Richard Nixon was there also.
Actually, we have, of course, interviewed Madeline Duncan Brown, who was Lyndon Johnson's mistress, and she told me the same story. That's in the JFK assassination update set that we offer to our listeners. So there's no question that meeting. You've actually talked to somebody else with the meeting?
Yes.
And will they come forward and talk about it, or they would?
Well, no, they won't talk about it.
Okay, but at least they were willing to tell you, as long as you promised not to put the information out.
That's right.
And so
I put it out, but I don't want to identify that person.
And I think, ladies and gentlemen, you must understand that they killed Jack Kennedy. They killed Bobby Kennedy. They killed Martin Luther King, no question at all. But, of course, they can't let the American people know about these things. And so, of course, sometimes people who know too much meet an unusual death. And I'm just glad that Ted Gunderson's still with us. Go right ahead.
Well, I plan to be with you for a number of years to come, believe me, Dr. Stan. It's only through divine intervention that I was able to avoid the 3 occasions when hitmen were waiting for me. But going back to Bill Sullivan, he was sitting on his porch in New Hampshire. He was there for hunting, and he was shot and killed by the son of a highway patrolman. And the highway patrolman's son said that he thought he was a deer.
Right.
I really think that Bill was murdered. I don't think there's any question about it. He knew too much. But continuing on, I might mention first of all, I said, about the FBI investigation of me, 3 separate occasions. And then, of course, we had the hitmen looking for me on 3 separate occasions. And then that didn't work. So the FBI and the DEA concocted an idea to set me up on a drug deal. And they put a girl named Pam Fawcett on me for 6 months. And after 6 months, Pam called me from Modesto and wanted to meet with me in Los Angeles. I met Pam at the big supermarket parking lot in the San Fernando Valley. Pam told me the whole story. And I told Pam, I said, Pam, look, you're working for the FBI. She had the run of the Modesto FBI office. They'd given her $2,000. She had her own coffee cup. She could come and go when she pleased. And she had a 14-year-old son that she was having difficulty with. And she would call me on the phone, and I'd give her a little fatherly advice about her son. And so when she came to me in this parking lot in the San Fernando Valley, she told me the story. And I said, Pam, why are you telling me this story? Why did you come to me after 6 months with those people? And she said, well, I woke up the other morning and I realized you're the only honest SOB that I've talked to in the last 6 months. Only, of course, SOB was spelled out. But I gave her a polygraph test. She passed. And I took a signed statement from her. I did a tape-recorded interview of her. And I sent that signed statement back to Washington, D.C., to Mr. Buck Revell, who was number 2 man at that time in the FBI. And Buck Revell had worked for me. And when I was number 2 man in Philadelphia, he was head of the bank robbery squad. I was assistant special agent in charge back in the 70s. And I told Buck, I said, Buck, first, the FBI investigation, 3 investigations of me for alleged fraud, and now this, meaning Pam Fawcett's signed statement. And I told Buck, I said, you guys are Bush. So, Bush League, of course, is minor league baseball. So, and then after that, Dr. Stan, after Pam Fawcett, then I had information that started coming out about me by people like Stu Webb and so on and so forth, and other individuals. Like you say, we don't need to mention the other names, but they're out there. Now, the latest thing that happened to me, and this is kind of unusual because here I'm on your radio show, and I can tell your people to do this. Go to MySpace, Ted Gunderson. MySpace, Ted Gunderson. Somebody has put up on MySpace, Ted Gunderson, a story that I supposedly wrote about my family. And at the end, what they're doing in this story, it's probably about 2 pages long. It's 2 pages full long on the internet, by the way, when you pull it off the internet. At the end, they're saying, this is me speaking, of course. They're saying it's me, but it isn't me. Somebody else wrote it. Hey, if you want to get out of the cult, come see me. I'll help you out. Well, this is a ploy by the cult to use my name and to use this letter as bait for people who want to get out of the cult. That way they can keep track of them. That is right out there right now if you want to go to MySpace, Ted Gunderson.
Okay, well, of course, the thing is that this is a nationwide network. There are literally millions of people involved in it. People say this could not be true. And yet if you read Marilyn Ferguson's book entitled The Aquarian Conspiracy, she was sort of a low level, but she actually said too much. She put out too much information in that 1980 book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. You'll find the quotation, the most important quotation from her book, in my syllabus on the planned police state. That's a planned police state. But behind everything going on today are powerful spiritual forces intent upon the destruction of our nation and of freedom throughout the world. Well, Ted, go right ahead.
Well, so then we had, after Pam Fawcett, I exposed that to the FBI and DEA, and she gave me the names of the agents and detail after detail. And I take a real good signed statement, by the way, because I've learned from a real pro when I first went into the FBI. And then the disinformation program by people like Stu Webb. As I say, he's an informant. I can document that, so you don't have to worry about a lawsuit, Dr. Stan. And then the next thing that happened is I've had an unbelievable number of surveillances of me. I've had people intimidate me. I've had my windows shot out twice when I'm standing near the window. I've been gassed. There have been attempts to gas me on the highway. I was able, because of my training and because of my experiences, I anticipated it and was able to avoid it. But the latest thing that happened to me a year ago last May, I had a 3-bedroom condominium in Las Vegas, and I noticed I'd be sitting at my desk and I had difficulty thinking, and I was disoriented, and I went down and took blood tests, and I had arsenic and cyanide in me, and I had a funny smell into my apartment on a regular basis, and I realized that I was being poisoned. So within a 2 weeks' notice, I left Las Vegas. I checked out immediately, realizing that if I stayed there, I probably wouldn't be alive in 6 months from that date. And I moved to a small town in Nebraska, Claytonia, Nebraska. And my good friend John DeCamp, who wrote the book, The Franklin Cover-Up, and I urge you folks to buy that book, by the way, The Franklin Cover-Up. It tells it like it is. John wrote this book. He's a former state senator from Nebraska. I've been working with John for years, on and off, on the Franklin Cover-Up case out of Nebraska. That's another story. And John said, come on back, and I went back to Nebraska, and I rented a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house from John, an old-timer, about 100 years old, beautiful old thing on about a third of an acre of land, for $550 a month. And so all you folks paying $1,500 for a 1-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles, you're welcome to come out and get yourself a good deal in Claytonia, Nebraska. But I was able, of course, by going to this location, Claytonia, hey, they come around the corner, I see them. It's not like in the big city where you don't know if it's a surveillance or not.
Well, of course, the reason John DeCamp actually moved there was because his children had been threatened because of that book he wrote. And it involves, of course, some of the most wealthy and powerful people in the United States involved in a pedophile ring. It involves Boys Town. It's an amazing, amazing story. And of course, the depravity at the highest levels of government. Of course, that's the story of the Franklin cover-up. And everything has been done to conceal this book. It's available, though. And John DeCamp has never, I think, advertised it, but it certainly is, it's got 100,000 copies out there?
180,000 copies he's sold.
All right. Of course, it's a wonderful book, and we really should be carrying it because it goes along with this same story. All across America, there are pedophile rings, but there's this one major one, Franklin cover-up, went right into Washington, D.C., didn't it?
It went right to the top, right to the White House.
Right.
And that was before I moved to Claytonia a year ago last May. Of course, I've known John for years, back in the late 1980s.
Hold that thought. We'll be right there in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest is Ted Gunderson. And certainly we're talking about John DeCamp. John DeCamp was a member of the state legislature who eventually wrote a book called The Franklin Cover-Up. It was the story of a massive pedophile ring. Of course, it began in the Middle West. It involved Boys Town, but it also went right up to Washington, D.C., right into the White House. They can't let the American people know about that. They can't let them know about Jeff Gannon, who's a male prostitute who's made frequent visits to the White House. In fact, even stayed overnight a couple of times there, according to the Secret Service records. We can't let the American people know about that sort of thing, and yet, of course, it exists in our society today, and of course, there are pictures of very high officials hugging this homosexual prostitute, somebody, of course, who at the highest level of the White House even today, but this has been going on for a long, long time. That's the Franklin cover-up, and you actually carry that book, don't you?
Yes, I do. That's on my website, tedgunderson.com. My website is down now. But this Pawns in the Game that I mentioned earlier and the Franklin cover-up are available if you want to send $18 to me. Can I give my address out,
Sure,
Doctor?
go right ahead.
Send $18. That covers shipping and handling to Ted Gunderson at P.O. Box 38, Post Office Box 38, Claytonia, Clatonia, Nebraska 68328. For $18, you can get a copy of the Franklin cover-up and the book Pawns in the Game. $18 each to Ted Gunderson, and that's Post Office Box 3838, Claytonia, Clatonia, Nebraska 68328. And that book is that John wrote is a fantastic book. It tells it like it is.
But it also mentions one of the wealthiest men in the world, as I remember.
Yeah, we don't. I was told by the kids. I interviewed a number of the kids involved in that case. I'm kind of unique, Doc. I'm not patting myself on the back, Doctor, but I'm not only a researcher, but I've gone out on the street and I've gone down in the trenches and I've done the work itself. I've been out there. Many of your authors, you just research and then write the books, but I've personally been involved in these cases at the street level. But I was told by the kids that I interviewed on the Nebraska Franklin cover-up case, you don't mention this person's name, it's not healthy. And so I kind of avoid mentioning his name, but he is mentioned in the book.
And I would once again suggest you read the book. I'm not about to go on the air and give the name out. That'll give you an incentive to get the book. But I would just simply say that if you were to talk about the wealthiest people in the world, why, of course, he would be one of the one of several that you would be naming. Go ahead.
That's right. That's right. And that case, Dr. Stan, that involves this again. Hey, wait a minute! Wake up, America! Satanic cults again. What happened was there was $40 million missing from this Franklin Savings and Loan, and the Franklin Savings and Loan was a savings and loan in the minority neighborhood. A fellow named Harold Anderson. This is all in the book, so you don't have to worry about being sued, Dr. Stan. A fellow named Harold Anderson, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald, was on the board of directors. There was a black man named Larry King. He was the president. And long story short, they were able to recover $38 million. $2 million is still missing. They don't know what happened to it. As a result of the publicity and pictures in the paper, 80 children came forward and said, "Mommy, that man molested me." And that's how the Franklin case got started. And it went from there. And it involved satanic cults, and involved human sacrifice, and involved some of the leading people in Omaha, Nebraska, in addition to Harold Anderson, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald. These are all named in the book. And the book's been out for 18 years. So you don't have to worry about a lawsuit again, Dr. Stan. Bob Wadman, the chief of police of Omaha, and the head of the society page for the Omaha World Herald, the leading newspaper in the state of Nebraska, and so on and so forth. And what happened was these children were being taken out of foster homes, orphanages, and Boys Town, and driven from Omaha to Sioux City, Iowa, 184 miles away, being placed in private jets, flown to Washington, D.C. for sex orgies with Congress and senators.
Incredible. Well, of course, the same sort of things happens at the Bohemian Grove, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know whether they take them from the Middle West, but you have to understand we've got some of the biggest men in the world. The most powerful men in the world go to the Bohemian Grove and run around the woods naked. If you haven't seen the DVD we have, The Secrets of the Bohemian Grove, where, of course, Alex Jones interviews one of the ex-members of the Bohemian Grove, left, and he admittedly left because he didn't want to be with all those men running around in the woods naked up there in Santa Rosa, Northern California, not too far from where I live. And we have got a 4-seat set on the Bohemian Grove as well. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest here is certainly Ted Gunderson. Ted, go right ahead with the story of the Franklin cover-up.
Well, that was just the tip of the iceberg. They were using these kids to blackmail congressmen, senators, and dignitaries. In my research, I have copies of the Washington Times headlines front page, which documents this. And, of course, then what they do is they tell the congressmen and senators how to vote. Hey, you vote this way or we will expose you. Remember that party you were at last Friday where you had sex with that little boy? Well, so on and so forth. Now, what they would do, there was a fellow named Rusty Nelson who was the official photographer of the group. And Rusty was a farm boy from Nebraska, and he lived in Omaha. He's a professional photographer, and he was taking pictures in the gay bar there, and they recruited him. We want you to come to work for us. So Rusty would go get on the big jets and the private jets and the lights and the action, and I'd never seen that before, go to Washington, D.C., and he would take pictures of these congressmen, senators, dignitaries having sex with the children, and that's how they blackmailed them. Now, what Rusty did is he would slip his own film in every once in a while and take pictures also, and then he would, of course, they would come for the pictures that he took officially, and he wouldn't tell them about the unofficial pictures he took for himself. And Rusty had these pictures, and they were with some people, the household name people, by the way, right up to the White House. And there was an investigator before me named Gary Caradori. Gary was a former Nebraska highway patrolman, and he was working for the committee, the Senate committee, the Nebraska Senate committee. John DeCamp was on the committee, along with Senator Lawrence Schmidt. And they were investigating this, and of course their careers had been ruined. They got rid of them in a hurry because they knew too much through the crooked voting machines, electronic voting machines. That's another story, by the way. And so Gary Caradori was rocking along, and Rusty Nelson is in Phoenix. And Rusty contacts Gary and says, I have the pictures that you're looking for. I have the smoking gun. So Gary Caradori jumps in his private plane, flies to Chicago. Rusty didn't want to meet him at Phoenix because that's where he was living. And Rusty flew to Chicago also and met and gave Gary Caradori these pictures of some of our leading people in Washington having sex with children. So he takes off, Gary does.
Hold that story. We'll be right back in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Ted is simply talking about, of course, that hired a photographer named Rusty. His job was to take pictures of the congressmen and senators in compromising relationships with these boys who had been taken from the Middle West, kidnapped or taken from foster homes from Boys Town, and brought for entertainment to Washington, D.C., and Rusty had the pictures. But there was somebody, who was this gentleman who wanted the inside information? Who is this?
Well, that would be Lawrence Schmidt and John DeCamp.
All right, but I thought you said that who was the other man that Rusty flew to Chicago to see?
Well, Gary Caradori was the investigator.
Oh, he was the investigator for the committee.
For the committee, right?
Okay, fine. So there was a Senate investigation there from the legislature in Nebraska, and they were investigating what was going on. Gary Caradori was the investigator, and so Rusty flies to Chicago to meet him and give him the pictures of all the things going on in Washington, D.C. So pick the story up there, Ted.
So Gary has these pictures that Rusty gave him in Chicago, and Gary and his 11-year-old son fly out of Chicago at 1:30 a.m. in the morning. He's a short distance out of Chicago, near Aurora, Illinois, as a matter of fact. And a farmer happened to be in this field, looked up, and there was an explosion, and the plane crashed. There was debris scattered around, and the first person at the scene was a deputy sheriff. And he starts picking up these pictures. Along comes an FBI agent, and he grabs the pictures from the deputy sheriff, and he says, keep your mouth shut. You never saw these pictures. And so the farmer said that there was definitely an explosion, the plane, even though we have a civilian involved, the plane is taken to a military base for examination for NA, National Transportation Board. And I tried everything I could to get my hands on that airplane, but they blocked me. Normally, you do not take a civilian airplane to a military base. So that was to control it. I personally, and by the way, they never found the back seat, and they never found Gary Caradori's briefcase, although the pictures were scattered about on the ground. A year later, that deputy sheriff's wife was murdered, so I rather suspect that was a signal for him to keep his mouth shut. Anyway, Rusty had called Lauren Schmidt that night and told Lauren on the telephone, which was a mistake, Senator, I have the smoking gun. I'm bringing it back with me, flying out of here such and such a time. I think that there was a bomb was placed in the plane, and he was murdered, as they do. They are very good at killing people. I mean, that's their profession, one of their professions. Burglaries, killing people. I've had them come into my condominium at night when I'm sleeping and leave subliminal messages in my bedroom when I get up in the morning. So we're dealing with this unbelievable, strong, illegal, criminal government enterprise. You have to understand, Dr. Stan, there's two elements in the government. There's the covert and the overt. The overt are the ones that I belonged to when I was in the FBI. That's the guys that go to the bank robbery and ask questions about what the suspects look like. The covert are the ones that are trained killers, assassins, burglars. They recruit these people, these covert operators, from special forces. McVeigh himself was recruited from special forces. He wrote a letter to his sister and told his sister he'd been recruited by the CIA to work on the CIA drug operation.
Now, this is the Timothy McVeigh who was involved in the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
And have you ever seen a copy of that letter? I've heard of it. I know Representative Keyes says that he has a copy. Do you have a copy of the letter?
No, I don't. I'd like to get a copy of that.
Well, of course, Keyes says he has it. And of course, Timothy wrote to his sister and said he was actually part of a secret special forces unit involved in illegal activity. Terry Nichols has come forward with the same story. There's a book called A Secret Worth Dying For, written by the man who shared the cell block with Timothy McVeigh, and Timothy McVeigh told him. They were all, told them all, he was working for a special unit of the special forces involved in criminal activity, and that was what was behind the Oklahoma City bombing. But, of course, we could never let the American people know that. The book is available on the internet. I got it from Amazon, A Secret Worth Dying For. So, and then, of course, the other information comes from Jeff Treadwell, whose brother was killed in a prison there in Oklahoma City, beaten to death. That, of course, murder was covered up by the government. He actually got this awarded $1,250,000 for pain and suffering for the family of the man who was beaten to death, but the government refuses to pay, even though, of course, the judge awarded the money to the family. So, but anyway, of course, it's an incredible story that, of course, that the Timothy McVeigh was actually working as an agent of the dark side of government. And anybody wants to check that out, the book is available, and we can document the other things. Go right ahead.
Well, it gets better, Dr. Stan, because Terry Nichols has now come forward. He's the co-conspirator of Oklahoma City. Has now come forward with a 19-page affidavit and claims that McVeigh told him that Larry Potts, number 2 man in the FBI, was the person who coordinated the Oklahoma City bombing. Larry Potts, number 2 man in the FBI, coordinated the Oklahoma City bombing.
Terry Nichols has said that.
Terry Nichols has said that.
Right, of course. Okay.
And, of course, that's being ignored by the press. But there is an affidavit. That affidavit was filed in the courts in Salt Lake City.
But, of course, you wouldn't expect that information would get out any more than you'd expect the truth about the murder of Martin Luther King, who was actually assassinated by a government hit team. But go right ahead.
Well, and so anyway, time marches on. We have all these, this situation. It's actually deplorable. It's unbelievable. And the government keeps getting away with it. And now we're looking at candidates like Hillary Clinton and Obama and McCain. I mean, they're all belong to the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR.
Well, I don't think that Obama belongs, but he's surrounded by CFR people, and Hillary's surrounded by CFR people, and John McCain belongs to the CFR, so we really don't have a choice, do we?
No, we really don't. I thought that Obama and Hillary were also members.
Not to my knowledge. I could be mistaken, but
I could be mistaken,
but we
too.
do
I've been
know
told
that they're both. For instance, who is the chief foreign policy advisor for Obama? His name is Zbigniew Brzezinski. Remember the CFR man who organized the Trilateral Commission, and certainly somebody just said somebody. Oh, Hillary, somebody, my producer, is saying that Hillary's been to a Bilderberger meeting. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm sure she has. And now, speaking of the Bohemian Grove, right up the street from where you are, Dr. Stan, I have kind of an interesting story. My webmaster, and this may have something to do with my website, tedgunderson.com, being down, and he's also, his name is Chris Jones. He is also webmaster for, I can't think of the ex-police officer from Phoenix offhand. And also, he's a webmaster for a woman named Linda Cater. And so he took a job in the Bohemian Grove here a couple of summers ago and came out with pictures, Chris Jones did, and put them on my website of the various locations, the cottages where they all stayed. But Jack McMahon is the police officer, a former Phoenix police officer. And he put them on there. And also Chris, in addition to being our webmasters, he's a limousine driver. He owns his own limousine. And he, when he would take police officers, primarily from the Orange County area, in his limousine, and they'd be taking dope and getting drunk and so forth. After you drop them off, he was calling the watch commander at the police department and telling him what's happening. Anyway, he was recently arrested for child molestation. And I was asked, I told Chris, I said, look, I will personally testify for you. And I reviewed the police investigation and testified concerning the interrogation techniques and also concerning the report writing and what have you. And in the interviews by the police officers with the children, they were all juveniles, they asked leading questions, they offered their opinions, totally unethical and not professional at all. Now, the worst part about it all is we just had a trial. That's one of the reasons I'm in Southern California. And every one of those boys, there were 6 boys, every one of them said he never touched them. He never touched them. There was no sex involved. Chris was interviewed by a psychiatrist, and before he would be interviewed with a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist made him take a polygraph test. He passed the polygraph test. The psychiatrist testified he did not have a propensity towards sexual attraction to children. Okay, on the witness stand, he testified to that effect. The children all testified on the witness stand. Chris did not touch them. But the boys would play pull your pants down and little games like that, little kid stuff. And one of the things that happened was when Chris babysat 3 of these boys, and the father would go to work at 2:30 in the morning. He lived with them, the boys, for 3.5 years. And then Chris would get up in the morning and take them to school and so on and so forth. He got free room and board for doing this. And then, so now we have a situation where on one occasion in 3.5 years, Chris dealt strip poker, dealt the hand for strip poker. The boys went down to the boxer shorts, didn't go any further than that. Again, Chris did not touch these boys. One time he played strip poker. Chris was tried and convicted of 3 counts of sexual molestation. Chris just has not been sentenced yet. He's going to be sentenced April the 25th. There's no question about it. The man, his attorney in the middle of the trial, Chris's attorney, told Chris, you're being framed. So there we have somebody who dared to step forward in the Bohemian Grove situation, which is where many of our dignitaries and leaders in Washington, D.C. go, including Henry Kissinger, and Nixon's been there in the past, and they have, who knows, they supposedly have a mock human sacrifice, but who knows if it's mock or otherwise. Alex Jones has done an excellent video of the Bohemian Grove.
In fact, we carry that. It's called The Secrets of the Bohemian Grove. We think it's a very important DVD.
But here's a young man, Chris is in his, I'd say, mid-30s, who dared to step forward to try to do something about what's going on, and he's going to go up to prison for probably 15 years. Did not touch those children. So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a corrupt government. And the judge and the prosecutor were, in fact, one of our witnesses noticed when the prosecutor entered the courtroom one day, the judge winked at him. I was on the witness stand for over 2 hours, Dr. Stan, as to the techniques used by the police and so on and so forth. And it was kind of interesting because the prosecutor told Chris's attorney the day before that he was going to discredit me. And so he kind of, on cross-examination, he came out, Mr. Gunderson, and according to information available to me, you say the FBI was involved in the bombing of the car bombing of the World Trade Center in February 1993. And that, of course, he wanted me to say, I came right back at him and said, yes, that's true. I said, it's in the New York Times article, October 28, 1993. And he went on and talked about Oklahoma City, and he talked about the McMartin preschool case, which I personally worked. And he said, you say there were tunnels under the school. That was a famous case out of Manhattan Beach, California, where the kids were being taken out into the community and prostituted. And there was a 2-year preliminary hearing on it alone. And the prosecutor said, and you say that there were tunnels under the school? I said, no, I didn't say so. I said, I hired an archaeologist. He said there were tunnels under the school. So it was kind of an interesting exchange back and forth. But poor Chris, my heart goes out to him. And I don't know if that's one of the reasons my TedGunderson.com is down tonight. It's been down. It went down yesterday, and it's still down. I don't know if that's one of the reasons or not. But anyway, I'll get it up as soon as I can. But I thought you'd kind of like to have that little story about Bohemian Grove and somebody that's tried to expose him and do something about it.
In fact, I met Chris at the conspiracy conference here, I think about a year ago, and eventually saw his films that were included, I believe, in Alex Jones' update on the Bohemian Grove.
That's right. He did furnish his research to Alex Jones.
Right. And, of course, the thing is, if you have any weakness at all, they'll come after you with fangs and claws. And, of course, these people are ruthless, and they will target you if they possibly can. And I think it's amazing that Ted has survived all this time trying to get the truth out about the satanic cults that dominate Washington, D.C. And this is really what is so terrible, that the fact that these things exist. The book, the Franklin cover-up, sold 180,000 copies, and yet, of course, never discussed on the media. Now, are you getting a much chance to get on television these days to get the information out?
Not really, Dr. Stan. Because of the disinformation about me on the Internet, my lectures have been cut way back. I hardly have any lectures anymore. I have a few radio shows now and then. But believe it or not, the general public, when they read all these nasty things about me on the Internet, a lot of them think it's true. They think, oh, it wouldn't be on the Internet if it wasn't true.
Well, unfortunately, there is a lot of very convincing information, but I have you on because I don't believe that. I believe you're just what you purport to be, and I think it's so vitally important that people understand that this is what happens to people who try to get the truth out. There's an organized effort to discredit them. And I've heard this from so many people, and I just simply say, I don't believe it. Well, Ted, certainly you are certainly doing your... are you working on any cases at the present time?
Yes, I'm working a case involving satanic cults out of Sonoma County, California, and also out of Wisconsin. And it's kind of an interesting story. This fellow, a lumberman from Wisconsin, interrupted the satanic ceremony on October 31st, 2004. in the woods in Sonoma. He had a gun battle, shot and killed 5 of them, and he reported to the newspapers. He didn't know if he should report it to the police or not because he's afraid he'd be charged with murder. He rescued a girl. The girl jumped in the car and took off. She was in the nude, and then several months later, 2 more Satanists came after him in Wisconsin. So that's the case I'm working right now.
All right, fine. Well, is he still alive?
He's still alive. He had a gun battle in Wisconsin. He shot them too. So
well, of course,
they got away. They had bulletproof vests on.
Well, I think that people have to understand there really are satanic cults, and they really tie into the highest levels of our government. Until people understand that this is not imaginary, it's really very, very real. And of course, we are involved in that classic battle between good and evil. Unfortunately, for the present, evil is on the throne. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up the program here with Ted Gunderson, right here at Radio Liberty. Ted, we've got 3 minutes to wrap up the programs. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, again, I can't emphasize too much that you people need to buy my DVDs for shipping and handling. They're $3.83 a piece. You can buy 10 of them for $17, and just send me a $20 bill, and go on the internet, 1-FREE-DVD.com, 1-FREE-DVD.com, and pick out there's over 400 to choose from, and send the money in. And so I can't emphasize that too much. I urge you folks to send $18 for a copy of Pawns in the Game, which explains the international satanic movement that's taking place in our country and our world today, and also $18 for the book, The Franklin Cover-Up, that was sold 180,000 copies without any publicity. By the way, Barnes & Noble and the other major bookstores refuse to carry that book, by the way, Dr. Stan.
I'm not surprised.
And my address is Post Office, Ted Gunderson, $18 on each book, Ted Gunderson, Post Office Box 38, Claytonia, Clatonia, Nebraska, 68328.
One more time, give that address.
Okay. Ted Gunderson, Post Office Box 38, Claytonia, Clatonia, Nebraska, 68328. $18 for each book.
Oh, no. Is there any chance that Jeffrey McDonald, Captain Jeffrey McDonald, who's been in prison for a crime he didn't commit for 25 years, is going to get another trial? Is there any way to get another judge, of course, an impartial judge?
I doubt it. I don't think so. I think this poor man's... I have other victims. Mike Riconosciuto is another victim. Look up his website, Michael, Riconosciuto, Michael Riconosciuto. You'll find some interesting information there.
And what was he? What was he in for?
He was an agency. He was a CIA agent for some 20 years. He dared to testify against the Department of Justice with the Brooks Committee here back in the late 1980s. He testified and shortly thereafter was arrested for drugs, tried and convicted, sentenced to 30 years.
Well, of course, we know that they tried to set up a John DeLorean, of course, the DeLorean cars. That was obviously set up, and John DeLorean was very, very fortunate to get off on that. They set people up, innocent people, and they send them to jail. And, of course, this is the dark side of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And until you understand, of course, that these things really do go on in our country. And, of course, this is why every one of you out there in the audience should be concerned. Ted, thanks so very much. God bless you, and may He protect you.
Thanks, Dr.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and I hope you've enjoyed our 2-hour interview with Ted Gunderson. I think he's a very, very courageous man. I've met Ted many times. I've studied his career, and I believe he's just what he purports to be, and his information is absolutely correct. For instance, one of the richest men in the world was involved with this pedophile ring described in the Franklin cover-up. Another one, his foundation finances the new service of the not World Goodwill, but the World Service Group, which is a subdivision up front for the for the Lucis Trust, which is a Luciferian organization. The New Group of World Service is the name of it, and you go to their website. They've actually taken the Jimmy Carter Foundation down, but they, at least the last time I was there, they had kept up the foundation as a funder, a major funder for the New Group of World Service, the foundation for another one of the richest men in the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is not imaginary. It's really very real. And of course, if you want to get to be wealthy, why, you go over to the dark side. There's tremendous advantages to it. Only, of course, you'll spend your eternity in hell. And that, of course, is the background of my talk on the forbidden secret. There really is power. There is wealth. There is prosperity. There's notoriety. There's fame there. But, of course, it will cost you your eternal soul. Avoid it like you would the plague. So again, we hope that many of you want to get my book, The Brotherhood of Darkness, my talk on the forbidden secret, our 4-tape or 4-CD set on the secret behind the secret, and that is, of course, what Oprah Winfrey and Larry Flynn are actually promoting all across America today, and millions of people are getting roped into this whole idea of the law of attraction. And there's a DVD that sold millions of copies, and a book that sold millions of copies. They're called The Secret. The Secret. Go up on the internet. You can pull them down. They have a whole network of people all across the world who are involved with The Secret. But what is The Secret? Well, it's exactly the same secret that I warn against in my talk on the forbidden secret. But they're encouraging you to join in this and to meditate and to focus your attention. And by focusing your attention, applying the law of attraction, you'll be able to control the universe. Because, of course, they tell you the ultimate secret, and that is that you are God. And that's exactly what the serpent said to Eve in the Garden of Eden. If you will eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall be as God, and you shall never die. And what is the most incredible thing is that there are literally millions of people today are being drawn into this. Of course, we're told in the 2 Thessalonians, 2nd chapter, that before the man of sin is exposed, there will be a great falling away of the church. People tell you you can't lose your salvation. Well, I really tend to disagree with that. I believe millions of people are being drawn away from the Christian gospel by the false leaders out there who are recruiting them into the secret, which is why you need to get our 4-tape or 4-CD set, The Secret Behind the Secret. And then let me suggest that you get our 4-tape set on the Wisdom of Malachi Martin and the book that goes with that, entitled Hostage to the Devil. You get our 4-tape or 4-CD set on the Supernatural and the book that goes with that, The Beautiful Side of Evil. The Beautiful Side of Evil, written by Johanna Michelson, who is a medium. And then, of course, the book and the 4-tape set on satanic crimes, which, of course, is a rehashing of the book written by Maury Torrey on the ultimate evil. And it includes not only that, but a great deal of information on the Bilderbergers. Of course, this most powerful organization, and we know that Bill Clinton's been to the Bilderberger meetings, apparently Hillary's been to the Bilderberger meetings, and you have to understand that this satanic movement extends into all of our organizations, the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, all part of this network of evil. Our telephone number, 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927, our webpage, radioliberty.com. Please pray for Radio Liberty, for our provision and our protection.